நம்முடைய தமிழ் மொழி உலகிலேயே மிகவும் தொன்மையான மொழி. எந்த தேசத்திடம் இருக்கின்றதோ அந்த தேசத்திடம் பெருமிதம் பொங்க வேண்டுமா கூடாதா சொல்லுங்க.
செம்மொழி வலையொலி யூடியூப் சேனல். இந்த சேனலின் மூலமாக, அந்த வலையொலியின் மூலமாக பல்வேறு தகவல்களை தினந்தோறும் நாங்கள் வழங்கி கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய அந்த நிலையில் சிலப்பதிகாரம் என்ற தலைப்பில் ஒவ்வொரு பகுதியாக வழங்கக்கூடிய அந்த தொகுப்பை முழுமையாக கண்டு பார்க்கலாம்.
The title of this lecture is On the Meaning and End of Life, Plato and Thiruvalluvar. In Tirukkural, there are some couplets which make us wonder if Valluvar was aware of the life and teachings of Socrates as reported in Plato's writings. But unfortunately, there is no other evidence, literary or historical, to corroborate this. It is traditionally believed that in the following Kural, there is a veiled reference to the death of the reputed Greek philosopher. The couplet is this: those who are desirous of the quintessence of courtesy will drink the poison that is poured for them before their very eyes. பயக்கண்டு நஞ்சுண்டு அமைவர் நயத்தக்க நாகரிகம் வேண்டுபவர். The last part of one of the dialogues of Plato, called Phaedo, gives a heart-rending account of the final moments of Socrates. This is the description that is found there. Crito made a sign to the servant who was standing by, and he went out, and having been absent for some time, returned with the jailer carrying the cup of poison. At the same time, he handed the cup to Socrates, who in the easiest and gentlest manner, without the least fear or change of color or feature, looking at the man with all his eyes, Socrates, as his manner was, took the cup and said, "What do you say about making a libation out of this cup to any god? May I or not?" The man answered, "We only prepare just so much as we deem enough." "I understand," he said. Socrates said, "I understand, but I may and must ask the gods to prosper my journey from this to the other world, and so be it according to my prayer." Then raising the cup to his lips, quite readily and cheerfully, he drank off the poison. Throughout the tragic happening, Socrates alone is said to have retained his calmness, while everyone else breaks out in a loud and passionate cry. He proves himself to be the very image of courtesy. The Socratic dialogue method consists in his demand for accurate definitions of honor, virtue, morality, justice and courage, for clear thinking and exact analysis of complex concepts. Valluvar insists as much on listening to the words of the wise as on learning by oneself. Listening to learned men may be better than learning by oneself. கற்றலில் கேட்டலே நன்று, because it will be to one a stick to lean upon at times of despondency. One of Socrates' interlocutors, Cephalus by name, expressing his desire to listen to Socrates as often as possible, tells him, I find I can assure you that in proportion as bodily pleasures lose their savour, my appetite for the things of the mind grows keener and I enjoy discussing them more than ever. Then Socrates says, to tell the truth, Cephalus, I answered, I enjoy talking with very old people. They have gone before us on a road by which we too may have to travel, and I think we do well to learn from them that it is like easy or difficult, rough or smooth. Valluvar, in 10 of his couplets, drives home the benefit of audio education, that is, listening to learned men. He says, when there is no food for the ear, the stomach may be offered a little. செவிக்கு உணவு இல்லாத போது சிறிது வயிற்றுக்கும் ஈயப்படும். The man that has meditated much and has gained a lot of instruction by listening to the wise doesn't talk nonsense even when in error. The ear, even if it can hear, is deaf if it has not been drilled by words of instruction. Those who have not listened to the subtle words of the wise will seldom attain humility of speech. What does it matter if those that know the taste of the tongue but not of the ear live or die? These are the couplets. In every dialogue penned by Plato, his teacher is seen taking enormous pains to elucidate every minute point and to discern all the subtleties of words heard from others. Valluvar says that this is what wisdom demands. Whatever the wise man speaks, he speaks in such a way that he is understood by everyone. Whatever he hears, he understands its profound meanings. Socrates asks the young and the old not to be bothered about the author of a particular view, but to ponder over it before accepting or rejecting it. He says, but that is what matters, said Charmides, from whom I heard this. No matter at all, Socrates says, for the point is not who said the words, but whether they are true or not. The famous philosopher chides Phaedo for being determined to know about the source of anything he hears before deciding its validity. There was a tradition in the temple of Dodona that oaks first gave prophetic utterances. The men of old, unlike in their simplicity to young philosophy, deemed that if they heard the truth, even from oak or rock, it was enough for them. Whereas you seem to consider not whether a thing is or is not true, but who the speaker is and from what country the tale comes. When Socrates is imprisoned after being sentenced to death, he tells his friends not to take even his words on trust, but to examine their worth impassionately. He says, and I would ask you to be thinking of the truth and not of Socrates. Agree with me if I seem to you to be speaking the truth, or if not, withstand me might and main, that I may not deceive you as well as myself in any enthusiasm and like the bee, leave my sting in you before I die. Valluvar expects this attitude to knowledge from every wise man and stresses it in more than one context. Valluvar says, if you want to know what immaturity is, it is a conceit that tells itself, I possess wisdom. The lesson that Socrates constantly teaches is that humility is wisdom. If he was called the wisest man by the oracle, it might have been because he is one who knows that he does not know. It is with missionary zeal that Socrates almost forces everyone by a series of questions to realize that he does not know what he thinks he knows. Valluvar glorifies the wisdom of being aware of one's ignorance in a casual simile used to describe the pleasure the lover derives from the union with his beloved. Aridhorum ariyamai kandatral, seridhorum seilai mattu. Just as the more one learns, the more one becomes aware of one's ignorance. The more I enjoy her company, the more intense my passion for her becomes. The Republic, in its first book, outlines some contemporary views of justice, later speaks at length of justice in the state and in the individual, and finally describes the rewards of justice in this life and after death. Socrates willingly takes upon himself the task of proving that justice not merely brings external rewards, but is intrinsically good as an inward state of the soul, even though the just man may be persecuted rather than rewarded. Socrates contends that justice belongs to that highest class of good things which are worth having not only for their consequences, but much more for their own sake. Things like sight and hearing, knowledge and health, whose value is genuine and intrinsic, not dependent on opinion, and that justice in itself, he says, benefits a man who has it in him, and injustice harms him, leaving rewards and reputation out of account. Man's happiness consists in the full realization of his characteristic virtue and function, and his virtue as a rational being is a clear insight into the true end of life, knowledge of the good. Justice is better than injustice for its own sake and for the happiness it brings to its possessor. Portraying the philosopher king and the despot, the tyrant, Socrates contrasts the ideally just man and the ideally unjust, and accepts that it may be proclaimed that the happiest man is he who is first in goodness and justice, namely the true king, who is also king over himself, and that the most miserable is that lowest example of injustice and vice, the born tyrant, whose tyranny prevails in his own soul and also over his country. At the end of the book, The Republic, after narrating the story of a man called Er, Socrates concludes that the myth demonstrates the immortality of the soul and teaches us that we shall keep always to the upward way and in all things pursue justice with the help of wisdom. Then we shall be at peace with heaven and with ourselves, both during our sojourn here and when, like victors in the games, collecting gifts from their friends, we receive the prize of justice, and so, not here only, but in the journey of 1,000 years, of which I have told you, we shall fare well. This is what Socrates says. What Valluvar calls aram has to be pursued for its own sake, as well as for its reward in this life and after death. He says, righteousness brings eminence and wealth. What else ennobles one more than righteousness? Sirappu Selvamum Enum. There is nothing more profitable than righteousness, nor anything more degrading than the forgetting of it. Be pure in heart. Righteousness is just that. All other things are nothing but ostentation. Manathukan Masilan Adal Anaithu Aran Ahula Neera Pira. Start practicing righteousness right now without saying, I will do it later. For righteousness will be your undying companion when death comes. That which comes of righteousness alone is happiness. All else is misery and devoid of fame besides. In Valluvar's view too, righteousness is a must for the king. He says, the prince is one that does not lapse from righteousness, eradicates all that is unrighteous, and guards his honor without ignoring the laws of valor. But elsewhere, Valluvar makes it clear that one should be just, righteous, and helpful to others, even if there is no heavenly reward. Receiving is bad, even if it may be said that it is the right path to heaven. Giving is good, even if it may be said that there is no heaven. Vinnulagam illaninum idale nandru. Here Valluvar is true to the ancient Tamil tradition. A poem by Kopparinjolan in Purananuru admonished those men without will who wonder whether or not they should perform a righteous act. This is the poem in Purananuru. Only the wavering with a heart, not bereft of dense dirt, will not stop doubting if they can do good deeds or not. The one that goes hunting tuskers may catch them. The hunter of small birds may return empty-handed. If the great with great aims may enjoy the fruits of their good deeds, they can even gain the pleasure of paradise. If there is no heavenly joy, they can even be freed from the cycle of births. If there is no rebirth, it is great to persist with a blameless body, leaving a fame as high as the Himalayan peaks. The four possibilities that are mentioned in this poem are: number 1, you may enjoy the fruits of good deeds here during your life. Number 2, you may have a place in heaven after death. Number 3, you may be released from the cycle of births. Number 4, you would have led a blameless life, attaining fame, and that is reward enough. It is underscored that skepticism about the rewards of virtue should not lead one to a rejection of righteous deeds. A traditional maxim of Greek morality was that it must be right to help friends and harm enemies. When Polemarchus gives expression to this belief, Socrates denies it and contends that we ought to do good even to those that hate us, and that the only thing that is good in itself is virtue. He goes on to say, it can no more be the function of goodness to do harm than of heat to cool or of drought to produce moisture. So, if the just man is good, the business of harming people, whether friends or not, must belong to his opposite, that is the unjust. It is noteworthy that Socrates, while in prison, dwells at length on the question of doing evil in return for evil, which is the morality of the many in Greece. Then we ought not to retaliate or render evil for evil to anyone, whatever evil we may have suffered from him. This is his advice. And I would have you consider, Crito, whether you really mean what you are saying. For this opinion has never been held and never will be held by any considerable number of persons, and those who are agreed and those who are not agreed upon this point have no common ground and can only despise one another when they see how widely they differ. Tell me then whether you agree with and assent to my first principle, that neither injury nor retaliation nor warding off evil by evil is ever right, and shall that be the premises of our argument. What Socrates, with much hesitation, labors to demonstrate after a series of questions and answers is that a virtuous man should not think of revenge. Valluvar goes a step further and insists on doing good even to one's enemies. Rejecting the path of punishment and violence, Valluvar recommends not even the path of forbearance and forgiving, but the path of forgetting the evil after doing good. The way of the pure in heart is not to injure others, even if they may gain the wealth that glorifies a man. How should a man punish those that have injured him? Valluvar says, let him put them to shame by doing them a good turn and forgetting both. Of what use is intelligence, he asks, to a man if he does not treat others' pain as his own? On the eve of his death, Socrates tells his friends that a true philosopher won't be scared of death, for death is but sleep, unlike waking eventuates in return of life. This is what Socrates says about death. Well, and is there not an opposite of life, as sleep is the opposite of waking? The state of sleep is opposed to the state of waking, and out of sleeping, waking is generated, and out of waking, sleeping and the process of generation is in the one case falling asleep and in the other waking up. Then here is a new way by which we arrive at the conclusion that the living come from the dead, just as the dead come from the living. And this, if true, affords a most certain proof that the world of the dead exists in some place out of which they come again. This is Socrates' contention. Without much ado, Valluvar uses the same metaphor to aver that just as sleep follows waking, death inevitably follows life. Death is like falling into sleep, and birth is like waking from sleep. உறங்குவது போலும் சாக்காடு, உறங்கி விழிப்பது போலும் பிறப்பு. And Valluvar has more to mock the stupidity of fear of death. The man that was yesterday has ceased to be today. This greatness this world has. நெருநல் உளனொருவன் இன்று இல்லை என்னும் பெருமை உடைத்து இவ்வுலகு. The Tamil poet doesn't stop here, but ventures to express his doubt and sympathy regarding the plight of all living beings. He asks, is there no permanent home for the soul which has taken shelter in the body? At the end of the Republic and in other dialogues, Plato expresses his firm belief that the soul is indestructible, immortal, and able to endure all good and evil. It is evident that Plato believes in the divine origin of the soul, in its fall to be incarnated in a cycle of births as a punishment for former sins, in the judgment after death, in the suffering of the unjust and the happiness of the just, in the millennial intervals between incarnations and in the hope of final release for the purified.